Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Real Work. I am Jennifer Tarl, and I am super excited today to welcome Jason Wavle. I think you're going to love this one. I can't wait to learn about this. He is an attention curator and a people person based in Dallas, Texas. He is a proud Yinzer, born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he spent a decade doing youth ministry before moving south. Over the last 4 years in Texas, he earned a Master of Theology degree from Dallas Theological Seminary, built a video business from the ground up to support himself through grad school, and worked hard to build meaningful community in a place far from home. While his eyes are set on long term pastoral ministry, he is currently taking a sabbatical, leveraging his flexibility to volunteer at his church, travel, and ministry. So join me in welcoming Jason. Hi, Jason. How are you today?
Hey, Jennifer, I'm doing all right. How are you?
Good. I can't wait to learn everything that you do. So, why don't we
Sure.
start with kind of walk me through your resume?
Yeah, I'd love to. So we were just saying a moment ago, like I think that my career journey, as I think about it, is pretty uncommon. I'm sure others have similar like it, but it just hasn't been the norm. So when
Mhm.
I graduated high school, I wasn't entirely sure. Wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do at that time. I had a few inklings of interests in film and video, had a lot of involvement at my church and a lot of passions going on there, and then also just had this sense of like, hey, I just don't know what the direction to take any of these things and what that could look like. And
Mhm.
so I ended up going to a 4 year film school in Pittsburgh, PA, Point Park University, and it was a great film school. But at the end of 1 year, I just realized it was not the direction that was going to serve me the longest. And
Mhm.
so kind of stepped out of that and went into a community college in Pittsburgh for a year where it started out with like a business track. Like, let me think, go the direction of like having my own photo video business. And I was doing some photo video freelance at the time, and kind of had on that track, but then went from there just back to doing gen eds. And it was kind of in that year and in that transition that I had already been working at my church in Pittsburgh for 2 years. So when I was a senior in high school, they hired me as an intern in the student ministry, essentially just helping with programming kind of things, helping to run
Mhm.
games and leading small groups and occasionally teaching and things like that. And I was still working at my church when I was at the first in film school. I was working at my church now, kind of part time when I was at community college, and was also working with a local nonprofit in Pittsburgh who were putting on camps. They were on the one hand kind of like a network for youth ministries in the Pittsburgh area. They were putting on summer camps and fall retreats for these churches and the middle school and high school students that comprise these churches. And then they also were doing a lot of like humanitarian work in Haiti, with a few orphanages that they had long term connections with. And so I was doing kind of the seasonal camp stuff with them. I was doing trips back and forth to Haiti with them. And so again, I just had my hand in all these places and had no sense of what that was going to look like until um, in that year in community college, through a conference and some conversations, got kind of what I just understand as like a direction from God and like a kind of calling and clarity of like, hey, I think I want to give the rest of my life to vocational ministry. Like, I want to give my life to the church, to God's people, to walking with them, growing with them, and being present in the local church and seeing that. Grow in good and right ways. And so I started leaning in. Went from community college to a 4 year Bible college that's in Louisville, Kentucky. So it's a part of Southern Seminary, the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. It's called Boyce College. Was doing that online while I started working full time at my church as the middle school ministry director and as the contemporary music director. So I was kind of wearing two hats at one time, which that tends to happen a lot when you work at a church that's not massive. You're just
Mhm.
wearing a lot of hats and trying to play a lot of different roles. And sat in that space for another 5 or 6 years past that and loved every second of it. Took me a few years to finish my bachelor's, which was a bachelor in biblical and theological studies from Boyce College, and kind of got by that one by the seat of my pants, just because there was a lot of stuff that, because I was doing it online, there was a lot of stuff that was in front of me that I really loved and gave a lot of my time to the stuff that was in front of me. But um, and stayed in working at my church there in that role in that kind of capacity for a number of years and loved every single second of it. Loved the students that I worked with, loved the people that were just around me in that space of my life. And towards the right around COVID, maybe a few years before that, and definitely the year after, was when I just started to feel, even unrelated to the pandemic, like, hey, there's just something in me that has a sense that this season that I'm in is coming to a close, and but having no sense of like what that next thing was. There was nothing wrong at my church or my job. It was just the sense of like, hey, I've been here, this is the church I grew up at, I've worked here for now about a decade, and just want to know like what is next. And through a lot of thinking and praying and searching and researching different things, it seemed like the next right step was seminary. So seminary is just grad school for
Mhm.
basically Bible and ministry training. So if you have a kind of ministry or pastoral trajectory, like a seminary degree is what you want to kind of shoot after. And found a seminary in Dallas, Texas that just seemed to check all the boxes that I was looking for. They were prioritizing the right things. They were talking about it in a way that really resonated with me, and had a focus on like community. Like I had a sense if I'm going to go and restart in a new place, I want to have somewhere that's going to have some natural community that I can plug into and just find some people to get around. And they had that. And so I made that jump. 4.5 years ago now. That would have been summer of 2021, and started doing my seminary degree full time. So it's a 120-hour master's degree, which is up there in terms of like the amount of credit hours you're going to get for a master's degree. And so did that full time, and finished that in about 4 years. And while I was doing that, started a video business. I had some video chops from my year of film school and doing some freelance stuff here and there throughout the time after that, and needed something at the time that would be flexible enough that I could do school and also pay enough that I could eat and pay rent, while not having a ton of hours to give to it. And some kind of remote editing of podcasts and highlight clips and things like that came up. But then I still had cameras, and there were small businesses that needed videos for their website that would just say, hey, here's who I am and what I can do. And so I kind of started leaning into that, and opportunity after opportunity came. I was around the country. I was in Vegas and New York and San Antonio, just getting around for different video gigs and that sort of thing. And then over those years, as I've been here, I kind of found my way into a local church here in Dallas. I currently live in the northwest area called Flower Mound, which is a suburb of Dallas, and have a church here that I started plugging into a couple months after I moved here, and just have gotten more and more involved since then. So I regularly volunteer at my church, and have kind of used, like I said in the bio there, have just used a lot of the flexibility and availability I have to serve my church, both students and the music ministry, and just other capacities that I can kind of step in there, and kind of find myself in this space now where I am back on the job hunt and looking for the next calling and role and things like that, but taking my time to get there while I take some time and space just to kind of pause, breathe, um, and live in the moment that I'm in, hopefully for my good.
Wow. So people might think you're like 70 years old because you've done so many things, but you are so young. I have so many questions. Okay. So you seem like you just never stop and you're very, very curious
Mm,
and you've tried many, many things. And I love your story because I talk to so many people, especially young people, who just kind of feel like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And they think that everyone has this path that is like, you do one, two, and three. And that doesn't
right.
seem to happen, I think, for most people. So thank you for sharing all of that. So let's start with first, what were you like as a kid? Like, let's say in high school, like what kind of things were you doing then?
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I think back to my high school, middle school and high school years, there are, I have so much language for it now that I did not have for it at that time.
I
I
think that's a really
do.
good point. Yeah, you have
Yeah,
language for
and
it as you get older. Mhm.
right, but I think as I look back on it now, I think that a lot of my high school, middle school years were a search for identity and belonging. I didn't know who I was,
Mhm.
didn't know where I fit in. And there are a lot of different ways I tried to kind of pursue those things, whether it was through gifts, certain gifts that I had and talents and things that I could provide for people, whether it was people at my church or friends in my school and things like that. But even at the time, there were natural outlets for that that were video stuff. For whatever reason, I always loved movies. My aunt, all actually, really, my entire family, and I don't have no issue saying this if you don't mind saying this.
No, go ahead.
So our family,
Yeah.
Jennifer is my cousin,
Yes.
and
I
I
should
just
have
think I have
mentioned that at the
very
beginning. I meant to,
yeah,
so sorry about that. Yeah.
yeah, no, good, good, good. So, I had fond memories of watching the Star Wars trilogy at my aunt Helen's,
Yes.
Jennifer's mother's
My
house.
mom, yep, mhm,
Growing up, and I like so my that entire wing of the family's like just affinity for Star Wars like was sewn into me, and I loved Star Wars. I love the movies, and
mhm,
so I think I loved grabbing on to cameras because of that kind of stuff in like the middle school, high school years, and then found natural ways to work it out, whether it was like video projects for school or little funny videos for church youth group stuff, or and then like eventually people had certain needs of like, hey, I think I never I would have I think both then and now I would describe myself as a bit of a nonconformist. I think it was always really tough for me, call it pride or whatever, just to put myself in one box. And so I didn't never really pursued like just one kind of like part-time job in high school. It was always like,
mhm,
hey, I know I can get some money for doing this kind of video work here or showing up for this sort of thing here. And so I think those things played its way into it. But then too, like I think there is part of me too when I think about the belonging stuff that um, I grew up as an only child and
mhm.
also had a large extended family, but not a ton of extended family who was close to my age. And
Yeah,
so I think that a lot of my growing up in the belonging stuff was looking for family, looking for people who were like me in my space of life that I could kind of journey with. And I found that at church, and I found that in the youth group at my church. And so there were a lot of ways that natural maybe giftings that I had of just being goofy and like being able to but also being like a doer. Like if you just give me a task, I can get after it if there's a clear vision. And so
mhm,
I think it was those kinds of things that when I was naturally finding myself, and again, like I look back on this because of my perspective and see like I do see these as ways that God was orchestrating certain things in my life and placing me in certain areas where these things just became natural. But I'd say it was those kind of things that kind of started this journey of just like, I'm going to try to do my best to follow a wise path, but I am starting to become increasingly okay with that not looking like everybody else's.
so interesting. So again, forgive me, everyone. I'm new to this podcasting thing. I should have mentioned that Jason and I are cousins at the beginning. I usually do that in my transition, but truth be
Sure.
told, I'm going to own this. I messed up the intro and I was saying the wrong school. So I was really nervous about that. And then I forgot to actually say how I knew you. So apologies, everyone. So I love actually that this came up because I think there's something kind of that just struck me in this conversation, which is I know you well,
Yeah.
but what I think is interesting is it's interesting to sit down with someone and to ask them, so walk me through your resume.
Hmm.
Because there's all of these things that you've done that, like, yeah, I know that you've done them. But then when you listen to it, like, in its totality, you
Yeah.
realize that there's this like journey there and that you've sort of been on this path of discovery. I love also, I think community is so important. I think family
Hmm.
is important, community is important. And I think so many people are searching for community, and I think we did lose a little bit of that during COVID.
How
How do you tell people to build a community? You seem like you're good at it, and I don't want to like diminish that, like that you're just good at it. You work at it, but like, what are
Mhm.
some tips that you have for community?
Yeah, I think a word that comes to mind, and it's probably one that I'll pull out, in other areas, but I think meaningful community requires vulnerability.
Okay, tell me
So if
more.
you yeah, so if you want to, find a people to belong to. It's going to require you to put yourself out there. Occasionally, I'm sure um, there will be occasional moments where a certain person, a certain group of people will come to you and will say, "Hey, we recognize that you are." And we just all have a hive mind mentality. We recognize that you're like us, and we want
Yeah.
you to be a part of us, and that sort of thing. But 9 times out of 10, there is this moment where you have that moment of I think I actually have to risk vulnerability for the sake of belonging. I think I have to actually put myself out there by either being the one who initiates to say, "Hey, would you love to come and do this thing with me?" or being the one who says "Hey, can I come and do that with you?" which I think a lot of us talk ourselves out of in the sense of "Hey, I don't want to be a burden and I don't want to
Yeah. Yeah.
do this thing." But ultimately, I think generally speaking, I think that is pretty refreshing for people, like somebody who is willing to listen. Actually, this is really really funny. I was just editing a podcast yesterday, a guy for another thing, and I just heard him say he's a counselor and a coach, and he was saying "Hey, if you aren't clear about your needs and wants, you're really tough to love because."
Interesting. Yeah.
Because people are just, you're leaving people guessing. You're leaving people less and guessing of "Hey, how do I connect with this person?"
Hmm.
And so it's actually but we feel like we're being a burden or too picky by asking "Hey, here's what I need, here's what I want, here's what I like."
Hmm.
But just by being more open about that, it actually gives somebody else an opportunity to connect with you. It provides. I think it's C.S. Lewis who talks about the moment of oh, you too, when you actually put
Mm.
yourself out there and talk about the thing, it gives somebody else to say, "Oh wait, you as well, I've experienced that, or I like that." And so yeah, when I think about meaningful community, I do think you do have to get it. You do have to go out there and get it. It might require some vulnerability and some risk, but I just have, in my experience, have seen that paying dividends. And I look back, there are even relationships that I have now where I have this relationship now, but I actually would have had it sooner had I just put myself out there. It just took longer for me and this person to kind of get together.
I love that. Okay, so you're a young person. What would you say to young people who are like, I don't even know what to do to go up to someone? Like, how do you take that first step? Like, I think a lot of people know how to ask someone out, let's say, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of modeled in the movies. But what do you do when you're just trying to create a community? Like, you left a community that you knew for your whole life
Yeah.
and you went by yourself. Like, how did you figure that out? Because now you have a beautiful community.
Yeah. I think part of it initially was uh, it wasn't random in the sense that certainly I wasn't finding people just on the street to connect with. And I'm also, as much as I do consider myself an extrovert, but I'm probably
Mhm.
a bit of an introverted extrovert. I'm not the person who's just going to walk up to a stranger on the street and just start talking. I can, but that's not my
Right.
disposition.
Right. I would
So
also
for
argue
me it
that
was
might be a little creepy just to walk
sure,
up to some random
sure,
person on the street. Yeah.
sure.
So,
Right.
yeah.
So I think for me it was well, certainly I found places, I got involved in places that were naturally leading to community building. And so for me it was hey, one of the things I was looking for in a seminary was not just a place where people would come to learn and then go out to their initial things. I was looking for somewhere that had an emphasis on building community, building a people,
Mhm.
creating sense of connection. And Dallas Seminary did have that. They were putting an emphasis on that in a way that it just wasn't seeming like other places were. And so that was a place that drew me there initially. But then whenever I was kind of looking for a church, I mean, in Dallas, Texas is a buckle in the
Huge.
Bible Belt, right? So I
Mhm.
mean, there's a church on every corner, and most of them are mega
Not
churches.
just
You're
a
just
church, it's like a sprawling complex.
right.
That
So
shocked me.
yeah, so it's just very different from our, where we're from,
Mhm.
and so it was listen, again, you feel very much like a small fish in a very 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 big pond, and so I found a church that resonated with me because on the one hand there were I just had this overwhelming sense of authenticity of the people that I was meeting and the things that I were seeing, the people I were meeting were people that I would want to be like,
Mhm.
and frankly, like it is a larger church, which meant that if I wanted to find community here, again, I would have to put myself out there. I would have to kind of sign up to go to events where I wouldn't know anybody. I'd have to go and kind of, trust that, like, hey, there might be somebody there that I could meet, or that people there that I might, find some sort of connection with. And so I think when I think about, if I were talking to somebody like me who was like, hey, I'm in a new place, how do I find community? I would say you have to position yourself, in a place where you're going to be able to connect with other people. So whether maybe that's a hobby, maybe that's, I mean, there are so many freaking pickleball places down here that are
Yes.
trying to just like
Hmm.
get people in the door. And that can, again, something as simple as that, like, and not just going to a pickleball place, but I think having a routine of that. It's like, hey, I'm going to go to this pickleball place, to this coffee shop, to my church at this time on this day, and just make a habit of it and be
Hmm.
regular and be known and recognize that, through consistency of that, I think is where, and again, through a little bit of vulnerability, like I think that is how you find and then start to build community.
Okay, that is such a great answer. And something struck me. I think so many people think like, well, I can't go to this big thing. It's too big. I'll never meet anyone. But at a big place, you can meet a small community and make it
Yeah,
your group. And I think you're actually, just statistically more likely to meet people at like a big place. Like I'm thinking about my college experience. I went to a big
sure.
college and I didn't know anyone. And I ended up meeting a small group of people in another smaller community. So you kind of just drill down
Yeah,
and find that. Okay, so I have questions about. Okay, so we know about you in high school. We know
sure.
you kind of were figuring things out in college, which I love that you are talking about that because I don't think college is for every person and I don't think a traditional college
Yeah.
path is for everyone. Like I think jumping around is, good. Yeah,
Yeah, and if I
you
can
have
jump in there
something?
real quick,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, with my, so I've worked with high school students for, um, 15 years at this point. I mean, since I was a high school student, I've worked with high
Yeah.
school students,
Mhm.
and like in that junior senior year, I'm meeting with a high school junior tonight
Mhm.
who let me know a few weeks ago about the immense pressure he is feeling about,
Yes.
like, just the space of life that he's in. And I think, again, sometimes pressure is good and you can,
Yeah.
leverage that in good ways. But, I am such a fan of, like, just saying, hey, listen, a gap year is a great idea. 4-year college might not be right for you. Like, there are so many, yeah, there are just so many options out there for high school students that they, don't either don't know are available or just are kind of feel kind of, shoehorned into uh, one space. And so I guess whether it's a high schooler listening or somebody who has a high schooler in their life, like, gosh, what a gift it is to have a conversation with them to say, like, hey, what, like, if there was no pipeline that you felt you had to go through, what would that look like?
Yeah.
And recognizing, like, it doesn't have to be the first pass at that, the first draft of that idea, but like there are just so many different routes they can go from that. And I've certainly experienced that myself from going three different, it took me three colleges to figure out where I was going to
Right.
be.
Right. And I also think that like you learn along the way. And at least in my experience, I didn't start out in speech pathology. And now I'm not even
Yeah,
really doing speech pathology anymore. But it's so
sure.
interesting that it's kids think they can't say, you know what, I made a mistake. I shouldn't do this.
Yeah,
And you could be in college and still finish a degree, but it might not be the degree that you went in to get. And then you can figure it out later. And then, like you did, you
right.
go to grad school and you figure it out from there. Okay. What kind of classes do you take in a master's level theological studies besides just like the Bible? Like we all know
Yeah,
that, right? But like, what do you
yeah.
really take?
Yeah, so there were, I'm trying to think of it. So our departments are, Bible exposition, which would basically be, but like here's content of Bible and like what is the kind of synthesis of each book and the and meta narrative, things like that. So you've got Bible exposition, you've got systematic theology as another department. So not just like what are the words in the Bible, but how does that extrapolate to what we believe about God, the world, and everything in between. Then you've got, which, and that also includes, what we'd call, that would include like a historical theology as well. So like history of the church and how theology is developed throughout time.
Interesting.
We have there's a missions department, so a department that just looks at world missions, like what is the mission of God? How is that everything from like sharing the good news of Jesus to like truly just helping the poor, like and how do both of those things relate to one another? There actually, this is I think newer for Dallas Seminary in the last, I don't know how long, but I know it's probably the newest department, is kind
Mhm.
of like the like a kind of like a creative arts department. I forget the official name, is
Okay.
forgetting off the top of my head, but there are like creative writing courses, because there are many people who come through who came through my school but take more of an academic route. So they're going on to PhD, they're going on to write, they're going on to be professors, and so like there are classes they take in that realm as well. Um, there are both Old Testament and New Testament departments, but both of those focus less on books of the Bible and more like languages and exegesis. So, meaning like you're going to learn in the New Testament department like biblical Greek, so kind of like very classic Koine Greek. I had 5 semesters of a dead language. Would not recommend for anyone, but if
Okay.
anybody wants to talk,
Did you
participles, I'd
like
love
it?
to have that conversation. There, parts of it, absolutely. Like
Mhm.
there are other seminaries who don't go that deep on the biblical languages. They just kind of give you like, hey, here's just what you need, and kind of get after it. And um, my final class, my 5th class of biblical Greek, was reading through the book of Romans in Greek and just kind of translating and like pulling out like, hey, what's being said here, which was just fascinating, and also
Mhm.
just like a very unique experience. So again, there's that part of it, and then even looking at things like the background of the cultural context of the New Testament,
I
things
think
like
that's
that.
always so
Same,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's fascinating. And so same thing with the Old Testament department. You're doing biblical Hebrew, as well as talking through some Old Testament uh, Hebrew cultural context. You're talking through like what are challenges we find with interpreting this in a modern context. Like what are the things what are some of the conversations around that? Like so much of this, very little did I find at Dallas Seminary was like, hey. There are a few things we'd claim to with a closed fist of like, nope, this is kind of non-negotiable for us, and that's just what we'd call the historic essentials of the faith. Like
Mhm.
Jesus is God, the Bible is his word, and he calls you to know him and love him. Like, so
Mhm.
there's that stuff, but virtually everything else, very little was like, hey, here's what you need to believe. There was very much like a, hey, here's the conversation.
Mhm.
Why don't you kind of pour over as much of the primary source as you can, and not just the Bible, but also these commentaries and also academic studies on these things to reflect on it. And so I think I'm probably forgetting a department, and somebody might get mad about it, but those were kind of the ones you typically find yourself in. I spent some of my time in the leadership department. And so I took a few classes that were kind of focusing on organizational leadership. So looking at literally things like the Harvard Business Review. I've got on my
Love it.
shelf over here like the Harvard Business Review on strategy, and just to say like, hey, this was not written for the church,
Mhm.
but if a follower of Jesus would believe that all truth is God's truth. So if something is true, it's because God made it that way. And if we're seeing something bear out in like corporate culture, that like, hey, here's how people work together. Like we can look at that and say, hey, does that apply to a church staff? And if so, how? How does it take to look at what our strategy is for how to whatever it is, do an event or reach people? Is there something that in the what we call like the secular world that actually might be good and right, that we don't have to
Yeah.
pretend like it's evil? So again, a whole bunch of stuff. Yes, there was Bible, but a ton of other stuff that really shaped and formed me in my time there.
Okay, I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah,
I have a lot of students on my other channel. They are not born in the US, from
yeah,
different parts of the world. I do think it might be interesting to do a follow up conversation on, just in a broad strokes, what is the Old Testament? What is the New Testament?
sure,
So, that would be a really deep dive. But for someone who's listening now, can you give me like the big points for like what's the Old Testament? What's the New Testament? I know this is a huge
sure,
question, but like I get this question from a lot of my
yeah.
students who aren't familiar with Christianity at all. So, like, what is that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm excited about it. And it's one of those things where, like, hey, if you like, it's really easy for people in the environment that I was in like the academic training environment. It's one
Mhm,
person. It's one thing to talk to a lay person who just is a faithful churchgoer and wants to know God and spends
mhm.
time in the Bible. And then it's another thing to be like, hey, I've spent too much time in an academic setting,
Yeah,
and like I know a lot, but I can't actually like hand it to you in a way that
yeah,
is like good,
yeah.
helpful, and understandable. And
Mhm,
so like I love that kind of question. Yeah. So the Bible as we have it today is is one book for us, but it really is a collection of books that are
mhm,
written over a period of books that are written over 2,000 years by a handful of different authors in three different languages that are different types of writings and different types of genres. You've got narrative, you've got poetry, you've got like apocalyptic vision kind of stuff, you've got like wisdom literature that's like, hey, here's just general principles for life. From the Christian perspective, we would see all of these things as, hey, these are all different pieces of a unified story that leads to Jesus. So that in some way, shape, or form, this story does have a direction. It has an overarching story that ends in the person of Christ, who is the image of God that God put on flesh and came to live among His people to show who He is and what He's like. And so you've got the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Bible. And so the Old Testament is also called the Hebrew Bible, it's the Jewish scriptures. And so in the Old Testament, you have the story of creation, you have the story of the formation of the Hebrew people, who we would call Israel, but that is a bit of a distinction there between what we'd call modern day Israel and like the
mhm,
biblical people of Israel.
mhm.
um, and their story of their story of God's faithfulness to them and their lack of faithfulness to God, yet this continual pursuit of God toward His people because He has a plan. He's trying to do something. And again, you find a ton of history in there. You find like literally just narrative stories, and then you get to parts that are just poetry of prayers and songs that these people are writing and singing together. And then you have prophets in there who are people sent by God to say, "Hey, y'all are wiling out. You need to come back, like come back to the one who loves you and came to you, and leave these things that are not good for you." And so that's kind of the story of the Old Testament, but it's kind of the story without an ending. So you
Mhm.
end with Malachi, and there's just all of this like story in the Old Testament of like, hey, but there is one who is to come, who's going to set things right. And is that going to be a king? Is that going to be a prophet? Is that going to be a priest? Like, what is it? And then in the New Testament, which again, you have kind of the centrality of like the Christian message, even though I mean we would say it all is, but in the New Testament, you have essentially the story of Jesus and His church. And so the first four books of the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are the four gospel accounts or the four narratives of Jesus, just from different perspectives. Just like if I lived my life, and Jennifer, I asked you to write, a biography of my life, and I also asked my mom and one of my friends, it's like, hey, there would be like true things in all of them, but they would just be a bit of a different perspective. You would
That's such a
emphasize
good way to
certain
say
things.
that. That's a great way to,
Yeah.
like, describe that. I love that, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, like, because I mean, even they even have specialties. Like, so Matthew is a teacher, and Mark is a preacher. Luke is a historian, and John is a theologian. And so, like, each
They
of
have
their
different
perspectives,
perspectives.
it kind
Yeah.
of like they emphasize what they kind of come out on. And so you got the stories of Jesus, and after that, the book of Acts, which is like the way that the church is birthed and the way that the Holy Spirit of God works through the church. And then following that is just letter after letter after letter of like, hey, it was, one. Letter from one church writing to like maybe like a leader, a disciple of Jesus, saying, "Hey, this is going on. What do we do here?" And so they
Tell
would
me, what is a
write.
disciple of Jesus for people who don't
Yes.
know what that is?
Thank you. Yeah. So a disciple, I mean, and a disciple isn't even necessarily a religious word. I mean, disciple just means to be one who studies under or apprentices under someone. So if you're a woodworker you might apprentice under, or a plumber you might apprentice under, like a senior plumber. And in the same way, disciples were somebody who would apprentice under a rabbi. So a rabbi was like a Jewish teacher, and Jesus was a rabbi. Jesus was a Jewish teacher who had people who apprenticed under him to not just get around him, but to become like him, to like hear the things he was saying, but then do the things that he did. And so there might be, as these churches started to spring up in the Jesus movement, they would reach out to somebody who was a disciple of Jesus, who was an apprentice of Jesus, say, "Hey, you knew the guy, you spent time with him. These people are saying this thing is true, or they're doing this. So what? How do we respond?" And so these letters were literally. It's kind of funny. Like we have these letters in the Bible that are just kind of one half of the correspondence. Like we don't have the initial letter that the Corinthians wrote to Paul, who was an apostle. He wasn't a direct disciple of Jesus, but like a man who was sent by, who had a vision of Jesus, was sent by Jesus. And they wrote him a letter, and we don't have their letter, but we do have his response of like,
So
"Hey,
interesting. Yeah.
here's like, again, here's how to be a faithful follower of Jesus in your time, in your place." The Bible ends with the book of Revelation, which tends to and just for clarity, it is Revelation, not Revelations. It's not
Oh, I
plural. There's
didn't
not
know that.
multiple
Thank you.
revelations.
Okay.
Um, and is the story of like where all things are heading. Most people tend to be like scared of it because there's a lot of imagery. It's apocalyptic. It's meant to like stir up these like thoughts, feelings, and
Hmm.
emotions. But what it's pointing to is like, hey, um, you need to know that the battle is already won. Like this is where things are heading, and all the things that you see in the world that bring you pain and that bring you just like where you see destruction, like God is going to make all things new. And so that's where the story of the Bible ends, and one that kind of gripped me a long time ago, and one that I'm trying to help people understand to this day. And so again, if I were to just raise that back up to like 30,000 feet, you've got the Old Testament, which is the story of the Hebrew people and God's dealings with them and his plan to do something good in the world. And then you have in the New Testament his response in the person of Jesus, God actually accomplishing that work through God himself putting on flesh and living among his people to do that work.
Wow. Okay. So interesting. If someone wants to like, even if you're not Christian, you just maybe want to like take
Yeah.
a look at the Bible. Is there an easy one to read, or is there
Yes.
like a good one that to start with?
Absolutely. Yeah. Bible translations are fascinating to talk about because people ask me all the time, like, what's the best one? I'm like, well, the
Mhm.
best one is the one that you read, honestly. There are some that are far more, they're just different philosophies. Some that are more word for word. They would take that ancient Greek word and just say, here's the closest English equivalent. But
Mhm.
again, even still, we've got 2,000 years of distance. There's not going to be an exact
That language, as my
translation.
other students know, language changes constantly,
Right.
constantly. So yeah.
Right. So there's some that are word for word, some that are thought for thought, and some that are kind of like in between.
Okay.
And so I'm a big fan of, if somebody, especially if you're not a native English speaker, there are probably two that I would look at. One would be the New Living Translation (NLT). That one tends to be pretty modern English and a little more thought for thought, yet pretty faithful. Like there are
Mhm.
scholars that I look at who are on that translation. I'm like, yep, trust that person, trust that person.
Mhm.
And then also one that's maybe a little more word for word, but still understandable. I think it's written at a seventh grade reading level, is the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible. And so those are the two I would look at of like, hey, one is a bit more thought for thought, one's a bit more word for word, but both
Mhm.
understandable depending on your reading level.
Okay, thank you for that because I get a lot of questions about that. Like, I'm just
Yeah.
not familiar with any of it. And so, thank you for that. Okay, let's jump ahead quickly. So, you said you put yourself through grad school, doing video work. Is that what attention curator means? Or what is an
Yes.
attention curator? Tell me more.
Sure. So I would argue, and I think there are many other people who are much smarter than me who would argue that like one of the greatest forms of currency and capital in our cultural moment is attention. Um, it is being
Mhm.
pulled in 1,000 different directions, and every little thing that's pulling your attention is trying to get just a piece of it for the sake of dollar profit growth, whatever. And so our attention is precious and valuable. And what I want to do with my life, whether I am preaching the Bible on stage, having a meal with somebody across the dinner table, um, or even with my video work is like, hey, I want to curate what you are giving your attention to, and I want that to be good and meaningful, and I want that to be for your good and for your growth and development. And so when I think of my job as or my kind of my goals as like a pastor and minister, even though I'm not a vocational minister right now, like there's still this emphasis of ministry in my life,
Mhm.
and I want to curate people's attention to like, hey, I think God is doing something in your life. All you have to do is notice it. All you have to do is pay attention to the things that are happening in your life, because there's not, very rarely, when we think of things of faith, is there this like, Moses on the mountaintop moment, burning bush, or like thunder and mount, like, sure, that can happen. But like 99.9% of the time, God works in the very ordinary things. And what you need to do is pay attention to it, and realize, hey, like he might be trying to get me to realize something here or to go this direction. And so, again, when I'm a lot of times, I'm a camp speaker. So I will step into like a summer camp or a retreat for typically middle school and high school students. And what I want to do in those times is say, hey, like y'all have, I mean, Jennifer, I don't know about you. I would not want to be a middle school or high school student in this current day and age.
I wouldn't
And
go back ever. No, it's
right,
just it's tough. Yeah,
right, and especially now,
it's even harder
and
now. Mhm.
right, and what I'm trying to say to them is like, hey, listen, like your there are so many things that are, and I'm not trying to say anything is evil. Or, I mean, there's some things that are evil, and I want to call that out. But I'm not saying that like that Instagram is a bad thing or that whatever it is. But I do want them to notice like, hey, there are ways to form connection and community. There are ways that God wants to do things in your life, and call you into abundant life. And so much of that is, again, very um, seldom focused on like a momentary spiritual experience and just this long obedience in the same direction. That's a quote from Eugene Peterson, of just like, hey, there is this yeah, the idea of calling attention to what God is doing in the ordinary things of life. That's attention curation.
I love that. I love that. Um, yeah, that's unexpected. I didn't expect,
Hmm.
I didn't know you were an attention curator, but it really does describe what you do perfectly. And
Sure.
I love also what you said about ministry, because I interviewed a guy a few weeks back, Paul Safner. He was fascinating. I've known this man for years, and I had
Mm,
no idea I can't remember what his actual degree was in, but he studied to be a minister. And
okay.
he ended up going a different route, but he talked a lot about very similar themes, creating a community, being intentional in your choices. And, he says he basically ministers every day, but it's through his work, not necessarily through like a church. So I thought
Yeah.
that was like an interesting, they were very similar, some similar themes there. What
Mm.
are you doing with your video stuff now? Like, what kind of projects are you working on?
Yeah, my to the joke that I always come back to with video work is I will do whatever pays but doesn't violate my moral conscience.
Okay.
And
I
so
love it.
typically that's a lot of very corporate stuff. So I do a lot of corporate work, a lot
Mhm,
of like just talking heads. Sometimes it's
mhm.
promotional stuff. There's a video I worked on last week for a large tech company that was, they're trying to put before the board of directors to close a multi-million dollar deal. Yet at the same time, there was a video I worked on a few weeks before that that was just like a meaningful gift that somebody was giving to somebody else. And so, like, I mean, literally all these things and everything in between. I do event coverage. Most of my stuff is kind of on-site full production work, but then there is the occasional just like remote editing job. Sometimes it's podcasts, sometimes it's um, uh, it's an interview that somebody else shot they want me to put together. So it ranges from everything in between, but a lot of small businesses, a lot of kind of DFW based corporations or work that's being done here, events and things like that.
Okay, so I'm going to brag about you. So Jason is an
Okay.
incredible speaker.
Mm.
He has a YouTube channel, so I'm going to link that below. Jason, remind me, it's at Jason Wavle, correct? Is
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
YouTube
All my
channel? Okay.
handles are just my name. Yep.
Oh, I love that. He's on Instagram and okay, so you do speaking, you sing, you are a great performer. You are motivational, I think, especially to kids in that middle school and high school range. You have your master's in, remind me again, divinity,
Theology. Yeah,
theology. Thank you. Um, and you do video work. So if anybody wants to connect with you and like hire you for one of those many, many things, how can they
sure.
find you?
Yeah, you can absolutely reach out to me on my website. I've kind of just got a mobile portfolio of all of those things, both from ministry stuff to video stuff on my website,
Hmm.
which is just my name, jasonwavle.co.
Hmm.
And then as well, I get sometimes DMs on Instagram and things like that. Those are the two best places to reach me.
Okay. Yeah. And I give you like a shout out. So this is a funny, just personal story. So Jason was home, and we don't go to your church. And my daughter and I came, and she loved it. And she was like, he was amazing. Because like we just talked to you like at events. And
Yeah.
so you just really shine and you're very gifted. And I know you've also not just gifted, you have worked for years to hone your skills. So
Mm,
you're an amazing singer, you're an amazing presenter. It was such a good message. I thought it was very motivational as well. Like I came out feeling great. So you're amazing. So thank you for taking the
mm,
time to talk to me on my little podcast that I'm starting here. I really appreciate it. And we will chit chat after this because
sure.
a lot of my students have a lot of questions and I do my best to kind of answer them, but we might need to do like a question and answer even for my other channel because
Sure.
lots of questions on it. So thank you so much, Jason. And
I love that. Those are some super kind words. Grateful for that. Grateful for you and the time together.
oh, always grateful for you. So, all right, have an amazing day. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Same
Take
to you.
care.